In this video, I'm going to recap one of the horror mystery films from 2023, titled Home for Rent. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with a woman named Ning arriving to check on her leased apartment. The real estate agent, Tom, shows her the condition of the place, which has been vandalized by the previous tenant. Tom also reveals that the tenant has left the country, and isn't replying to his emails. Upon hearing this, a frustrated Ning asserts that she can't pay the mortgage without the apartment rent. Tom then comes up with a solution. He mentions that he has a client who's interested in Ning's large house. He suggests that her family move into this apartment, and rent out the house she's staying instead, which would bring in more money. However, Ning says that the house is actually owned by her husband, who won't agree with this decision. We later meet her family, which includes her husband, Quinn, and their daughter, Ing. While having breakfast, Ning talks to her husband about renting their house and moving into the apartment. But he is clearly opposed to the idea, and says that it's better to sell the apartment for good. He is also worried about their big house getting vandalized, but Ning assures him that won't be the case, since these new tenants are doctors. In the next scene, Ning arrives at a job interview, when she gets the news that the tenants are arriving to see the house. She requests Quinn that he meet with them and show them the place. He is still hesitant, but she convinces him to chat with the tenants before making a final decision. Later, when Ning returns to the house, she notices Quinn talking to an elderly woman named Ratri, who is handing him a book. Tom introduces Ning to the tenants, Ratri and her daughter, Nutch, saying they are both doctors. They inquire about when they can move in, but before Ning can respond, Quinn suddenly says next month. A month later, we see her family packing their stuff, and moving out of the house. Before leaving, Ning says goodbye to their neighbor, Aunt Forn. Ning urges Aunt Forn to contact her if the new tenants cause any problems. In the evening, the family settles into their apartment, and coincidentally, it's also Ing's birthday. They have a small celebration, and Ning gives her a little doll as a gift. However, Ing doesn't like it, and says she actually wanted a Guri doll, with purple hair. Ning apologizes to her daughter, explaining that such dolls are no longer manufactured. Afterward, we see Quinn preparing to sleep on the couch. Ning invites him inside, but he refuses, saying he doesn't want to disturb them by snoring. Ning thanks him for agreeing to move into the condo, and tries to get intimate with him. Suddenly, she notices a triangle-shaped tattoo on his chest, so Quinn quickly explains that he got it after getting drunk and losing a bet with his boss. Several days later, Ning returns to the house to retrieve some photo albums from the storage. Nutch doesn't seem too thrilled to see her, but she lets her in anyway. As they open the storage room, Ning notices the same triangle-shaped tattoo on Nutch's neck, leaving her in confusion. And as Nutch goes inside, Ning receives a text message from Aunt Forn, who invites her to visit her house before she leaves. Later, Ning goes to the aunt's place, and a worried Forn explains that the new neighbors don't appear to be doctors at all. They stay at home all day, and there are crow feathers hanging by the door, as if they practice black magic. Aunt Forn reveals that every morning at 4 a.m., she hears chanting noises coming from Ing's old bedroom. She also recalls that one night, her dog was barking very loudly, and when she looked outside, she noticed a flock of crows flying over Ning's house. The next morning, she discovered her dog brutally ripped apart and dead. Aunt Forn breaks into tears upon saying this. When Ning returns home, she checks the medical database, and enters her tenants' names. To her shock, neither of their names are listed, which means they are not doctors. The next day, she calls her police friend, Nut, and requests that he conduct a background check on the tenants. Nut asks if they have done anything illegal, to which Ning suspects that they might be cultists. In the next scene, it is around 4 a.m., and Ning wakes up to find that her sliding door is opened. But as she closes it, she soon receives a text from Aunt Forn, who says the neighbors are performing another ritual. The old woman has even sent a video of Ratri chanting in a room, but the video abruptly ends when Ratri stares directly at Aunt Forn. A terrified Ning immediately asks the aunt if she's okay, but receives no response. Following this, Ning goes to check on her husband, but the couch is empty. She calls him, but hears his phone ringing from nearby. Not long after, Quinn appears from outside, and explains that he had gone to discard a rat he had caught. Ning notices that he's carrying the red book given by Rattree and asks about it. He casually responds that he used the book to trap the rat, and he will throw it away. But as Ning enters her room, she notices her husband putting the book into his bag and locking it. The next morning, Ning goes to see Aunt Thorne since she hasn't replied to her text. No one answers the door, and instead, she is approached by Nutch. Nutch claims that Aunt Thorne has gone to see her relatives outside the city. Hearing this, Ning states that the old woman did not have any relatives elsewhere, but Nutch says Aunt Thorne told her that. When Ning returns to her apartment, she finds her daughter's belongings scattered everywhere. Enraged at the sight, she goes to scold her, but finds a doll sitting on the chair instead. This is the same Guri doll that Ning desired, and is no longer manufactured. Suddenly, it begins speaking. Ing hurriedly takes the doll from her mother, and reveals that it was a gift from her dad for her birthday. In the next scene, Ning awakens from a nightmare, to discover the creepy doll staring right at her. Startled, she puts it away, but then she hears an alarm from Quinn's phone outside. Ning realizes that it's 3:45 in the morning. She peeks into the living room, and notices Quinn getting ready to leave with the red book. Ning then grabs her phone and decides to follow him, but her charger falls to the ground, making a loud noise. Suddenly, she sees Quinn go back to sleep on the couch. A confused Ning then tries to remove the distracting hanging cloth, right when she notices a ghost in the mirror, but doesn't see anything in reality. Ning then looks in the mirror again, and still notices the ghost touching Ing. This sends her into a state of panic, and she eventually turns on the lights, after which the ghost disappears. The next morning, Ning notices some scratches on her daughter's chest that strangely resemble a triangle. She realizes that something very sinister is going on, so she stays awake until 3:45 a.m., and hears Quinn's alarm go off. Ning peeks into the hallway, and sees her husband leaving the apartment with the red book. She proceeds to follow him, and eventually arrives at the rooftop. The woman then steps outside, where she sees a swarm of crows flying around. At the same time, she notices Quinn sitting on the rooftop, and performing a cult ritual. Ning decides to record this on her phone, but a ghostly figure blocks her camera. She can't see the ghost in real, but when she uses the camera, it is right in front of her. A freaked out Ning attempts to touch the ghost. At this moment, the crows suddenly begin attacking her, so she rushes back to the apartment, and pretends to be asleep. Soon after, Quinn also arrives and calls her name, but when she doesn't reply, he leaves the bedroom. The next morning, while Quinn is in the bathroom, Ning goes through his bag, and takes the red book. And as soon as he gets out, she hides it in her clothes, and rushes to the bathroom. She then attempts to read the contents, but is surprised to discover that all the pages are blank. Just then, Quinn begins banging on the door, asking if she took something from his bag. Ning gets scared and opens a cabinet to hide the book. But to her shock, she finds the cabinet full of totems, drawings, and amulets used to perform cult rituals. In the afternoon, Ning arrives at her daughter's school to pick her up. Surprisingly, she notices Rattree with Ing, who is reading the same red book. This enrages her, and she rushes toward them, but the two vanish in an instant. Her daughter shows up moments later, and when asked if Rattree was here, Ing denies it and claims she just came from her class. But at this moment, Ning notices a triangle-shaped mark on her daughter's neck and is horrified. Having had enough, Ning drives home with Ing, and tells her to stay in the car. She then heads upstairs to gather some of their belongings. But when she returns to the vehicle, she is shocked to find Quinn inside. Ning says they're leaving him. She further explains that Rattree is attempting to harm their daughter, but Quinn finds it ridiculous. He calls Rattree a mother, and says she would never do such a thing. Ning is repulsed by his behavior and proceeds to leave, but Quinn urges her to leave their daughter behind. This results in a physical altercation between the two, but the security guards eventually restrain Quinn, allowing Ning to drive off. Later, we see the mother and daughter in a hotel room, and Ing is clearly upset for some reason. She says that she wants to go back to help her father. This makes Ning realize that the girl knows something and asks what she means, but Ing doesn't respond and simply cries. The next day, Ning and her cop friend Nut meet in the hotel lobby, and it turns out he has discovered some crucial information about the tenants. Nut reveals that their IDs have been forged, and Ratri's real name is different. There are no criminal charges against her, but it's still suspicious that she forged her identity to rent the house. Afterward, Ning returns to the hotel room, and is shocked to find her daughter missing. She begins to panic, and a staff member informs her that Ing went with her father. Upon hearing this, Ning rushes back to the apartment right away, but finds no one there. She then notices blood dripping from her bed, and when she removes the mattress, she finds a blood-stained triangle. Horrified, Ning rushes to the house to find Ratri, but it turns out the place has already been vacated, leaving behind a lot of ritual items. She then calls Tom, who reveals that the tenants moved out yesterday, and her husband was aware of this. Ning explains everything to Tom in a panic and asks for his help. Shortly after, they head out to find Ing. But midway through the journey, Ning notices a triangle tattoo on Tom's hand, making her realize he's also a member of the cult. Filled with fear, she pretends that she needs to vomit, and urges him to stop the car. Tom then approaches to check on her, and she uses this opportunity to rush inside, and lock all the doors. But then, the cultist breaks the car window, and as she tries to run away, he knocks her out, and takes out a suitcase. He then takes the heavy suitcase, which seems to have Ning inside, to an isolated lake house. Coincidentally, his alarm goes off, and it's 3:45 a.m. Following this, the scene flashes back to 11 years ago, where we see Quinn living with his eldest daughter, Ja, in the same house. It turns out her mother has already left, and it is only the two of them as a family. We also learn that the Guri doll with purple hair belongs to Ja, and is a gift from her father. The two are very happy with their lives, but one day, an unfortunate incident takes place. The father asks Ja to take a shower, claiming that he had just fixed the water heater. However, while Ja is showering, the water heater suddenly explodes, killing her tragically. In the aftermath of this incident, Quinn goes into a deep depression, and begins to treat the doll as if it were his daughter. He frequently speaks to it, and even prepares food for it. But his life takes a positive turn one day when Ning knocks on his door as an insurance agent. They soon start a relationship, and eventually get married. They also have a daughter together, but despite everything, Quinn still misses Ja, and often grieves for her. One day, he shockingly notices Ing singing and talking to Ja. However, the little girl claims she was simply talking to her bunny. Over time, Quinn observes how Ing behaves exactly like her sister, even sharing the same preferences in food and toys. Days later, while he is showing the house to Ratri, the woman immediately senses that Ja passed away here. She reveals that her spirit still lingers around because she died so young. Ratri then gives him the red book, saying it might be of help to him, and promises if she's able to move into the house, they will have a chance to talk more. In the following days, Quinn becomes increasingly involved in cult rituals, hoping to reconnect with his daughter. However, after so many efforts with the devil, Ratri informs him that it is time for Ja's spirit to move on, as she cannot remain here forever. Quinn desperately begins to cry, explaining that he still hasn't seen his daughter. He begs Ratri to bring her back, and she reveals that it is possible, but it would require the body of another girl of the same age. She suggests that Ing is the perfect candidate, and assures him that two spirits can coexist in the same body. After hearing that Ing won't be harmed in the process, Quinn finally agrees to the plan. Later, he gifts the Guri doll to Ing, and explains the situation to her. The girl in turn admits that she has been seeing Ja's spirit, but hasn't encountered her since they moved into the apartment. Nonetheless, she is on board with her dad's plan as she, too, wants her sister back. The next day, Ratri explains to Quinn that for the ritual to work, Ing needs to have 3 marks on her body. She reveals that she has already made 1 mark, and plans to make another at school today. The 3rd mark, however, has to be made by Quinn himself, as he is the one who created her. Ratri then approaches Ing in school, and marks her neck with the triangle symbol. Later, when Ing is taken to the hotel by her mom, she calls Quinn and gives him the address. Following this, the two head to the house to meet Ratri. And when Ning arrives looking for them, they all hide inside Aunt Thorne's house and watch her leave. They then go to the main house, where they begin performing the cult ritual. As the ceremony starts, Quinn uses his blood to make a mark on Ing's forehead, preparing her to host another spirit inside her. Not long after, he notices the shadow of a little girl in the distance. Quinn believes it is Ja, and feels a surge of happiness. But as the shadow grows, Aunt Thorne suddenly opens the door and enters. Quinn is relieved to see her, but she unexpectedly stabs him, and her eyes turn completely white. He tries to run away, but she catches him, and stabs him one more time. A worried Ing rushes to her father, but Nutch arrives and pulls her away. Next, Ratri takes out a wooden doll. She introduces the doll as her youngest daughter, Prey, who died when she was 7. It turns out Ratri never intended to help Quinn. Instead, she has been searching for a suitable body for decades to revive her daughter. Through a series of flashbacks, we see how the cultists had been stalking Ing for months to use her. They then vandalized the apartment with the help of Tom, and made it look like the previous tenants did it. On their first night in the big house, Ratri discovered Ja's spirit walking around the house. She also found the Guri doll in the attic, and eventually trapped Ja's spirit inside it. This is the reason Ing stopped seeing her sister after they moved out. Every night, the cult performed a ritual to reawaken the dormant spirit of Prey. In the present, we see Tom taking Ning to the lake house, when his alarm suddenly goes off. He notices that Ning's phone is also ringing inside the suitcase. Tom throws the phone away, but when he turns around, Ning is already gone. He then aggressively begins looking for her, while Ning hides under his car, and prepares to attack him. Back at the house, the ritual with Ing has started, and Quinn, on the verge of death, desperately tries to save his daughter. In another scene, Ning suddenly emerges with a pair of garden shears and attacks Tom. Quinn and Nutch also get into an intense fight, but she eventually overpowers him. After Quinn finally collapses, Nutch receives a text message from Tom, saying he wants to join them and ask for the location. But she is unaware that it is actually Ning who has killed Tom. Shortly after, Ning arrives at the house, and she grabs a hammer. She then creates a small explosion by putting spray paint in the microwave, and turning it on. Nutch rushes downstairs to put out the fire, allowing Ning to head upstairs. Upon arriving at the room, she notices her daughter unconscious in bed while Ratri is performing a ritual. Ning tries to strike the witch with her hammer, but an unseen force stops her. In the mirror, we see a group of ghosts grabbing her, and preventing her from harming Ratri. Ning then turns her attention to the wooden doll next to her daughter, and begins striking it repeatedly. Moments later, a rotting ghoul emerges from the doll and tries to strangle Ning. But she eventually uses the hammer to smash the main symbol on its forehead. This causes the doll to vanish, and Ning tries to escape the house with her daughter. However, she is confronted by Ratri and Nutch, who try to stop her. Ning begs them to let her child go, but Ratri responds it's not her child, as Ing is already dead. And then all of a sudden, the roof collapses. Later, everyone is trapped underneath the wreckage. Ratri then witnesses Ing open her eyes, grab a sharp object, and jab the sharp object into Nutch's skull. Following this, the scene shifts back to when Quinn was dying. In his last moments, he had seen Ja's spirit in the Guri doll. He used his blood to mark the doll and asked her to save her sister. In the present, Ing approaches Ratri, and repeatedly spears the old woman until she dies. Shortly after, the police arrive, and find Ing hugging her dead father, sobbing uncontrollably. The scene then shifts to some time later. When Ning visits her daughter in the hospital, she is shocked to hear the girl calling her auntie. The girl then cries, and reveals that she is actually Ja, and she doesn't know what happened to Ing. Upon hearing this, Ning bursts into tears, and Ja apologizes for replacing her daughter. Despite this, Ning hugs her, and asks her not to apologize, as she's still her daughter. The movie then ends with the mother and daughter heading to school on a bicycle, hoping for a fresh start.